礼拜六这个礼拜六要讲的是用我这个沟通方式来改变、取代你那个那个是有参加慢性病管理课的同学呢，先练一下沟通的那一章没有的话呢，想一下你平常怎么跟太太、跟先生、跟子女、跟爸爸妈妈沟通，有什么困难想一下，下个礼拜我们大家来谈因为那个非常不容易的方式，因为我们每个人都是一把年纪了都有个性的那要跟其他的夫妻啦、子女啦、父母沟通，这个个性改不了。那么现在我们是在美国美国是比较主张用比较文明的方法所以呢他用我的 statement 来取代你动不动就要骂人的那个方式呢要改掉那这样怎么改？这个就是下个礼拜要谈的那今天 Vivian 他是我的律师了那我邀请他来谈这个，因为我这次去 Tennessee 开会这个题目也很重要incapacity 这个，当你倒下去的时候，你没办法决定的时候，谁替你决定？什么情形叫做你没办法决定这样假设你现在昏迷了，那么你都没有讲要怎么治疗你身体，谁替你决定这个一定要有一个系统那我等一下要问Vivian的是，假如我问 Steve， 我认为 Steve 你老是偷我的东西，我可以吃可以喝，我说你偷我，你说没有啊，是我 crazy 还是怎么样？这个时候叫做 capacity 跟 incapacity， 这个我也是想问的问题那我们很高兴 Vivian 来跟我们谈他国语不是很好，可能用英语讲那大家想一下，然后问谢谢 Vivian。
As Dr. Chen said, my Chinese is so-so. 我听得懂，讲得不好。We will go over the materials in English, but if you have questions and you want me to slow down, or maybe I can trouble Dr. Chen to help translate a little bit if there's some words that are not clear, you just let me know, okay? So as Dr. Chen said, the topic of guardianship and incapacity is actually very important to all of us in today's world. There are probably more materials and more seminars and presentations of wills or living trusts. Those are very important as well. But as medical advance, and this topic, I think a lot of people, they don't want to talk about it. It's a sad topic. It's something we don't want to think about. I often have clients that come to see me and they said, this is how I want to do it. Very simple. I want to do it like this if I die. Well, okay, but what happens if you're not deceased? And things in this world is not in our control. We like things easy and simple. That's correct. But medical issues could not necessarily be easy. Sometimes, something's happened. Maybe we're not all the way incapacitated. How do you have people help you when you are, so what we, in English, you say, you're in the gray area. Sometimes you have good memory, sometimes you don't. And sometimes you can manage, I have a lot of clients, we can have very good conversations about food, restaurants, and the children. But then I say, oh, what should we do with the house, apartment? They can't track with me anymore. I have a lot of those. And over 20-some years that I have worked in this field, that's actually the most difficult situation, is sometimes maybe not all the way gone, enough that maybe a banker will let you write a check for your next door neighbor for $1 million because you see the banker helping you, doing a lot of things and think, oh, I think he's fine. But not until something happens do they know, oh, maybe he didn't mean to do that. I had one client who recently died, he was Jewish. I think I represented him for 12 years. He was a very sharp man, very, very bright. All his children were very successful. He was a survivor of the Holocaust. You know what the Holocaust is, right? And he used to come and tell me stories about concentration camp and what happened. He never come to my office late. He knows exactly what he wants. Every time he wants changes, he was very sharp. 4 years ago, he started missing appointments. But he's not all the way gone. He'd call me and say, oh, I can't make it. Can I reschedule? Not a problem for me. But he called us 2 hours or 3 hours ahead. And we didn't think anything of it. It happened a second time within 2 weeks. And at that time, he was late. He says, I forgot that you were in this other office. I took the bus to Seattle. I used to be in Seattle. I used to be on top of the Westlake building, and I moved to Bellevue, but it's been more than 7 years that I've been in Bellevue. So then I worry a little bit. Then he came in to see me. I talked to him, and he was fine for 90% of the conversation. And when we talk about some of the changes, he initiated. He called me. He wanted to make changes. I didn't call him to come in. I already had some concerns. So I had to make the call. He has 3 kids, all very bright. One is a lawyer that's a lobbyist. You know what a lobbyist is? They go to Washington and try to, get things done for people. He represented, Apple Association, Wine Association, really bright man. I never met him, but I heard all about them. Then one of his sons is a doctor in Seattle, very busy. The daughter is the head of one of the big insurance companies. But I never met them. When the client was like this, and I knew he lived by himself in Mercer Island, I was concerned. So I had to call the son. I made the call, and according to the documents that I prepared for him, his oldest son in DC was the first one. So that's the only person I can call, because that's what's on the documents. But I had to call him and say, just wanted to check in and see. I said, I'm your father's lawyer. Don't know you've heard about me. Hopefully you do. And I hate to make those kind of calls. And I've done it more than once, okay? And I said, I have some concerns about your father's capacity. Have you and your siblings noticed anything? And he said, it's funny that you call. He just talked to his brother, who's a doctor. They're not very close. They don't see each other probably every few months. You know how it is. Your children are busy. I'm like that. Sometimes I don't see my mother for a few months, So, and he says, but the last time they talked, my brother raised some concerns too. And so when I called, and they were more concerned, they hadn't had tests, he had the beginning of Alzheimer's. Okay. But at that point, was he incapacitated? Okay. That is the topic that we're going to talk about today. And since I brought up that example, I think I'll walk you through what that means. Yeah. It just went to sleep. I talked to him. So, okay. Incapacity. What does that mean? What do you think incapacity means? Somebody think about a definition. What do you think? Is it only when a doctor says so? Is it only when somebody go ask Dr. Chen, is my father incapacitated? Do you think that's how that's determined?
No.
Maybe. Okay, yes.
Incapable to determine things, correct?
That's a very good answer. But who decides that? Is it the doctor? Or is it the son? Or is it the person himself? Who decides?
Maybe the children.
No.
The person. The person.
The person himself.
Or the system.
This means that they cannot execute their intention.
Yes, that's a very close answer. That's correct. But who makes that decision? The court. Okay, that's exactly what legal definition is. Okay, a person is deemed incapacitated relating to financial and their assets. Okay, when the superior court determines Individual is at significant risk of financial harm based on the ability to not adequately manage property. It's some kind of combination of what you said. But a lot of times people think it's the person, or they think it's the doctor. Now, it's not technically wrong to say the doctor. It is this way unless you have a document in your trust or in your power of attorney, if you have one done, that says you're doctor. Okay? So Dr. Chen is my doctor. My documents might say, I am incapacitated if my treating doctor and my doctor for 30 years together say, I am incapacitated. Okay? The answer is usually not your children, but the children helps to make that decision. The children might bring the father or the mother to see the doctor. Okay? In your own documents, you can say 1 doctor, 2 doctors, 3 doctors. I've had clients who say 1 medical doctor and 1 more mental doctor to make an assessment, because doctors have their own specialty. I have had several cases actually that the patient fool their doctor that they are fully incapacitated when they're not. I represented this wife. She lives in one of the islands, and she told me her husband's not incapacitated. Her husband is a really, really smart doctor himself. And his doctor was his best friend for 40-some years. Okay? And unfortunately, when he got ill, he would stay all night in the garage, check things out, and then blame the wife. He actually hit her and said, what did you do with my paper from whenever? But the daytime, he's okay. And then he started making bad decisions, financial decisions, so she comes to me. What do I do? If he has no documents, I have to go to court. Because under the law, this is what the law says. You have to go to the Superior Court, show the court this person is not able to manage property. Now I'm going to show you something else. Let's look at here. Okay, so this is what I already said. It's not technically a medical decision. It's a legal decision dependent on medical. Okay? The judge will, of course, look at medical opinions. Okay? But if the person is halfway not admitting it, that doctor I told you about with the wife, he was brilliant. And then I talked to his doctor because the wife knows him. And his best friend told me that I also think he's incompetent, but I cannot write it down because he's never shown it to me. And he says, we will have a hard time, and in order for us to do this, to have a court determine him not to be incompetent, I think I tried to do without. Maybe I try just for a little while, do without, might be easier. What he told me was, I would have to put him in a special facility, a medical facility, observe for 3 days before we can prove he is incapacitated. Because he is not willing himself. He tries to trick his friend, he tried to trick other doctors. He said if we have to prove that he is incapacitated, it will take 3 days. And he has to stay there voluntarily for 3 days. Okay? We all know some people could be stubborn. Could be men, could be women. They could be very stubborn and say, I'm fine, don't want to go. You try to lock me away. Right?
That's right.
But you're doing it for himself, So there are times this is very difficult. So when you have no documents that says who makes those decisions and how, when you are perfectly fine, because when this man was perfectly fine, he probably could make a decision as to how he should be determined that way. Okay? So your answer that the person himself or herself should make the decision is actually possible if you write it down yourself ahead of time. You know yourself. You know who you trust to help make that decision. Okay? You could even say, consent of my wife, consent of my son, consent of my daughter, plus my doctor of 50 years. But like this situation, because his best friend actually thinks he's incompetent because he knows him really well, and he's also a doctor. But he says, I can't prove it to you, and he won't admit it. But
how to filter what kind, problem can be incapacity?
That's the difficulty, and I'll tell you that there won't be an answer for every situation. But because you know your family best, you know who you trust, you are the better person to make that decision as to how that happens, as opposed to the superior court. The judge doesn't know you. The judge doesn't know your family member. So then I have this other situation that I've seen before, that the family member tried to take advantage of the older people and the incompetent. They want to pretend you are not able. I have had to sue a daughter who took my client's, all his funds after his wife died. He was very depressed. He actually tried to commit suicide. Okay? But he was better. He was just depressed. And the daughter sold his house when he was in the hospital and took it and ran out of state. Okay? Before she did that, she was here, somewhat taking care of him, told the bankers, all the people, that her father's crazy. But she took all his money, not to take care of him, and she ran out of state. Then this man's other granddaughter, from a son that died, hired me to find out what happened. And we find out all this. And when I go to visit this man at the hospital when he was still alive, he just cried. Because he only had one more child. He had one son and one daughter. Son died with a granddaughter. This daughter took his money and ran. But he had no protection, no proper documents. So then we had to go to court. Try to get it back. Try to prove that he's not crazy and incapacitated. So these are just examples to show you that one way, you have greedy people around you, possibly. The other way, you are protecting you and your family from yourself sometimes, because you are not yourself when you're sick. I'm sure Dr. Chen has seen it, patients that you probably took care of many years, and then all of a sudden, they change a little bit in front. For that Jewish man I told you about, it's a good thing that I represented him for this long. Because if I just first started, when he started to have problems, I would not say he's incapacitated. But I know how on the spot he was before. And then I see him again, I think it was only like a 3-4 year period since the last time I met him, I noticed. And then we know the culture. Yes?
Can I say my case?
Yes. Oh, good.
2个礼拜前，我有一个病人，现在到76岁，我已经看了10几年，他都去种菜啦，都会拿他的菜来给我吃，我完全没有认为他不对。结果到他开始 miss appointment， 我觉得奇怪了。他的儿子是急诊室的医师，是 doctor， 我打电话给他儿子。他儿子说：“我不管我爸爸，他太凶了，我都不管他。” OK， 那我这个问题来了，所以这样开始我们的 communication 才知道他已经痴呆了。他太太他很凶，所以他太太都不敢讲话，所以每一次来他太太都 yes yes yes， 所以我不知道他已经在改变，只知道奇怪，appointment 这个真 miss 掉，所以开始问他儿子都不敢管。这是常常遇到。还有很重要就是说，我刚开玩笑的说 ，Steve 你口很好，他可以跟你讲得非常好，但是 实际问题是他没办法 make decision。我有一个也是 Jewish patient，白天跟我讲的很好，他的儿子是 West Point 的，西点军校的，但是到晚上他可以在路边指着电线杆一直骂，到晚上他就来了，所以呢，这个是 very difficult，他可以服务我们，但是很多情况是家属才知道，我们没办法知道。
Yeah, no, a good case. I'll tell you another one how it went further. So this man was also a doctor too. He lived on Bainbridge Island, okay? And I represented him because he was not close to his children also. But we appointed a bank to manage his assets for him because he knew he had Alzheimer's. This man admitted it. He came to my office and told me. But he said, I don't want to bother my children. He loves them. He wants them to have the asset someday. But I want to have a professional. So we put together a bank. It was U.S. Bank. They were the trustee. And they managed for him while he was still pretty good, but he knew that was coming. And because he was a doctor, he's seen how it progresses. And he says, I want to get it taken care of. He was married to somebody else at that point. It wasn't the mother of the children, but so it was a recent marriage. He only married for 1 year at that point. And that wife, she was just very honest. She says, I actually took care of one husband who passed away. I want to let you know, I don't have the energy to do over. So I'm going to help you put together the people, and then I'm going to have to leave. She was very honest. So we had the bank take care of money. She helped hire 2 caregivers, live on the property. Okay, this house was on Bainbridge Island. You have a full view of Seattle downtown. They have a guest house on the property. The 2 caregivers, husband and wife, perfect, right? Live on the property, take care of him. About 9 months later, the bank called me and says, Vivian, do you know if this client is having some extra spending for some reason? His credit card bills are $17,000, and he usually never over $2,000-3,000 a month because the bank helps him pay. And so we look at it, also kind of strange, kind of shopping. Not really my client. We found out the caregivers added their names to his credit card. And then also tell him to write checks. Now at that point, I had not talked to him for 9 months at least, if not longer. He progressed downward, okay? And because the bank is helping him, somebody else is writing the check. Now this could have been his son, okay, writing, then notice. And then she called me. We actually had to work with the DA's office, the prosecutor's office, and arrest these people. We hired a private investigator because the children also noticed that the caregiver, when they asked them, oh, dad's sleeping, not available. Not a good situation. Okay, it took about 6 months to arrest those people, but they were arrested. But because we planned ahead, see, I can't guarantee you bad things won't happen. You might have the situation, but if you plan ahead, put the people together and keep the accountability, hopefully it would avoid the situation. We got all the charges reversed, collected some of the money, but some of the money is not collectible. They were spending the money, right? So that's another example of what happens once this situation occurs. I have clients who come to me even before that. They say, my doctor told me I have a possibility in the future. The planning is now. You don't want to wait, because when you're not fully there, it's very hard to plan. This is a situation even when everybody gets along. What if you have 3 kids and 2 of them don't like the other one? They go to court and fight for the guardianship, right? And they say, oh, my sister's very bad. She did da. I should be the guardian. I'm sure you've heard of it, right? Or, my brother's wife doesn't like me, and my brother is this. I hear it all the time. So, but the court doesn't know, even the lawyers don't know. I don't know the history of the family. Now, sometimes I do, because I represent them for a long time, and I know who's really, They are not, because my clients have been telling me for years. But if nothing is done and only that time happens, I'm going to tell you how it works with the court-ordered type of guardianship. So if somebody has a stroke or already Alzheimer's too late, what happens? We have to go to court, and the court appoints somebody called a guardian. This is not a one-day process, though. The process takes about 4 to 6 months. Okay, and they find a suitable guardian by the court. Now, it has to be over 18 years old, have to be sound mind. This person cannot be convicted of a felony, okay? And cannot be a non-resident also, by the way. If your relatives are outside of the country, you should look at trying to appoint somebody in the country. But the non-resident could appoint an agent. So I have clients, their relatives outside who are managing the care, and they appoint us to be their agent, okay, for the service, so they qualify. How do they choose? Okay, the court decides, but you know what? The judge really is not very patient. Judges spend maybe 5-10 minutes looking at your case. Do you really think that they know? But they're smarter than that. So they choose what's called guardian ad litem. I'm on slide number 10, okay? Guardian ad litem is a temporary person that the court choose. And say, but they choose from a list. They say, oh, next, Mary Jones. Mary Jones is your guardian ad litem. Mary Jones will come to your house, interview you, interview the family, interview the doctor. And then in 90 days, the guardian ad litem will send a report to the court and say who this person thinks should be the guardian.
这里大家了解吗？guardian ad litem，
监护人
不是，这是短期的，哦，它只是短期的、临时的，哦，
只有90天吗？
呀，它还有另外定义的长期的。
Now, unless you have a total of $2,000 or less in your bank account, you pay for this guardian. You have no right to choose. And the court makes you pay them. The court chooses them, and the court makes you pay them. This guardian ad litem might also hire a lawyer if the case is complicated. So then you pay the guardian ad litem, and you pay the guardian lawyer, and your own lawyer. And if your children are fighting, they also have their own lawyers. I've done that before too. So, they visit, they review everything, and they recommend. Okay? I have had a few cases where I represented, actually one case is the father, but he had some other issues in his history. And the guardian ad litem says, he has this old legal problem. I don't want him to be the guardian of a son who has some challenging difficulties. I think we should appoint a professional. It is possible that a guardian ad litem will say, appoint a professional instead of that person. Okay? So once the court look at the report, and hopefully all the family agree. If they don't agree, a guardianship case could take 1 year, year and a half, 2 years. It's not uncommon because then they have to do lots of deposition, ask questions. One person fight, no, your information's a lie. Then you have to mess with it. In the meantime, you, the person, are not well taken care of usually. So when the guardian is appointed, they say, okay, your son is the right person to do it. After about 4 to 6 months, then it's not done. A guardianship continues because the guardian has to file a care plan, has to file accounting for the money with the court. And every 1 to 3 years, and about 10 years ago, it was actually, and before, was closer to 3 years. Every time I usually can get 3 years, unless there's some trust issues, then we say 1 year, 2 years. Recently, the past few years, I want to say more, between the last 5 to 10 years, the court actually, by default, wants report every year. Every time you file a report, my client has to come see me. We do a full accounting. You spend $5 on this medication, and money went this way, that way. His care, he had a seizure. We report to the board until this person dies. Every time you touch the court is at least a few $1,000s. It's a few $1,000s if there's no dispute, because we have to file these. Sometimes I've had to go to tell the court 2 or 3 times. Because I show up in the court and say, oh, I forgot to ask you this question last time. Can you go find out and then tell me? Then I go find out and then tell the judge. And then I show up, sometimes it's a different judge. And he said, oh, why did the other judge want to see that? I don't care. Done. Approved. Yeah, we do what the judge tells us, so sometimes they're a little unreasonable. I have to say that because I'm not judge. So how do you avoid guardianship? What can you do to avoid it? Now there are times you can't, okay? Sometimes even if you have documents, and let's say your children prove the documents are not valid, let's say done when you are not really there, okay? Or there are lawsuits about the person being able to do certain things, those things may still have a lawsuit. But in general, if you have a well-done durable power of attorney, and I'm just going to come out to say it, that's not the Costco or the Staples ones, okay? Then under the power of attorney, you say when you are incapacitated. I am incapacitated when I am determined to be incapacitated by my doctor and one more treating me. Or, the treating doctor. Sometimes people don't want to put too much criteria to it if you already have some medical problems and it has to be acted on quick. So we draft that section to make it work for you. But on a typical basis, it's nice to see too. Some of my clients said, no, one's enough. Whoever that's treating me, I trust. That's fine too. And if you have that document and then you have a stroke, a year later, your family can take the document and manage everything. No court, no guardianship. Okay? Another way to manage your assets only, okay, is to have a trust. Revocable trust can manage your assets in the same way, and then you say, if I'm incapacitated by a letter done by my doctor and another doctor and consent of my spouse too, then the next person in line under the document will be the trustee. Now, you say, oh, there are 2 ways to do it. Which way? Which way should we do it? We actually do both, okay? On a general basis, a trust is a legal entity. A trust holding assets, the trustee, you name yourself or you name your spouse or your son and your daughter, they have no question to do everything. The durable power of attorney is not 100%. And we do our best, but the banks that you deal with out there sometimes don't like to take them, okay? Sometimes they send it through their New York office and have it looked at, and they require you to do certain things before it's done. It really depends on which bank you're at. And if you're interested, I can tell you which one works better and which one doesn't, but it's very bank sensitive. Okay? But if you have a trust, it's a legal entity. It's like a company, right? If you have a company, you have a director. The director manages. They don't question that. Okay? And so you have a new director, because the old director is sick, that's fine too. So it's easier to do it through a trust, especially if you have some complicated assets. You've got real estate, you've got stock, you've got international assets, you've got local assets. Then I would usually have clients do a trust. But do you need a power of attorney? You do. If you need to deal with IRS, you need to deal with your own utilities bills, credit card, those things you cannot put in the name of the trust. So then your power of attorney comes in. That covers pretty much everything. Your documents can also be healthcare, medical power of attorney, to say, if I can't make my own medical decision, who do I want? Okay? It could be very simple, like my spouse or my children, But it could also be a little bit more complicated if that works for your family. So when my own father was sick, the three of us were trying to take turns to help take care of him. One person may not be available all the time, right? So if he appointed one of us, and then the other, if that first person's not available, you have to prove that person resigns. If you put more than one, and say, I trust all my kids, they don't fight. Maybe you have that situation. And any one of them can make a decision. You can do that because it's simpler to take care of you. If I have a client that has a long-term illness already, and generally, I like to hear about the children, what they do and how likely they are to fight. We put that together because it's the most convenient when you're at the doctor. You know that nurse shifts change, hospital, have documentation. You don't want to have to prove to them who you are each time. But if you don't have that, you can definitely name the person that you think makes the best decision for you, okay? If you have too many and they don't get along, it is not good either, because then it's the same as not having a document. So that's why usually I like to talk to the clients about what kind of family situation. Do they know each other? Do they get along? If you have multiple marriages, I actually like to listen to more and say, well, they get along because they know the two sides of the family never see each other. That doesn't mean you should name them all because they don't fight. Because when there's a problem, that's when they do. But you just don't know. You cannot assume everything is perfect. If that's the situation, I usually then you just pick the person that you would go to. If you were perfectly fine, who would you ask? Who would you talk to help you make that decision? That's the person that you should appoint. Okay, so that's pretty much all the materials that I had prepared for you. If you have additional questions, you have some specific situations that you would like to consult with us, you can give us a call. I'd be happy to give you a courtesy meeting to talk about how we can help you. So, Dr. Chen?
We have a Q&A
Yes,
session here briefly.
absolutely.
我讲个 case， 这个 actually happened this year。我们不要认为我们都很 smart， 都什么 nothing will happen， 不可能聪明。有一个 case 呢，一个男的，他的太太过世了，然后没多久他中风了，他需要人照顾，那他儿女都很忙，所以这个 caregiver 就一直照顾着他，然后。他因为太太过世以后，他很 lonely， 他就相信这个 caregiver 说要跟他结婚，这个非常 disaster 其实 caregiver 说好，搬到我这边来，怎么样？他 caregiver 住1楼，他住1楼 ，caregiver 只有40岁，他是70多岁所以他相信 caregiver 要跟他结婚，所以把他的 asset 全部。让 caregiver 可以处理 ，within 1 year 差不多10多万都没有了，车子也全部他们 caregiver 跟他住在一起没有错，他是住楼下，跟他的男朋友住在一起。那这个 caregiver 也不把他带去看病，什么都没有，他是很可怜。所以有一天他受不了了，他自己一个人on the street for many miles， 后来被 pick up 才。找出来，所以呢，西雅图那个开始 investigate 后来慢慢抓出来，所以呢，我们老了都会有一种心理，说孤单，想要有一个 partner 来什么，就要非常小心，对不对？要想第二春啊或什么。那另外刚刚讲的，你要 appoint guardianship or power attorney， 要想好。真的，你的 gut feeling 是这个事情，然后一定要做。我们 medical 常常麻烦在于，你相信每一个 children， 但是每个 children 都 agree with each other 的时候，你是头痛死了。一个在夏威夷，在 Pennsylvania， 在哪里？你怎么 make decision？ 要 on the phone， 大家 conference， 夏威夷的时间跟这边时间不一样，你怎么 conference？ 那说 I don't agree， 妈咪什么的，那怎么办？所以你一定要指定一个，这样的话呢，他才能够真的照你的事情做，这样。所以呢，这个不要认为不会发生，但是你一发生就成息息的。
假如你现在法院指定一个 guardian for you。 那你是 incapacity。那假如说 guardian 不 do things for your interest， 那谁来决定说这个换这个 guardian？
Who would come find the guardian? Is that what you said?
Who is going to replace the guardian?
Oh, the guardian is not available.
No. 就是说because he thought I appoint you and then I think you are not doing
fire you.
Okay. So you cannot be the person firing the guardian because by the time the guardian's acting, you are already not in a. That's right. So you individually are not legally the one to fire. However, you can have accountability, okay? So for a trust, which is instead of a guardian, we sometimes have these things called trust protector or trust co-trustees. That let's say I pick a bank to be my trustee to manage everything, but I say my bank has to report to my oldest daughter. My daughter might be busy, okay, and she cannot do the day-to-day, and my son will complain if she does, but the bank will have to report to them, and they will see, oh, what happened to my, mom's money? Used to be this much, now is this. You can give them to write the fire the bank. That's a good question. But because guardianship is only in existence when you are no longer in control. Because if you appoint them today, they're not serving yet. They only serve after you are deemed incapacitated. So you're not going to be the person to fire them. But let's say you're halfway in between. You can make a call and say, oh, ask your daughter to do this. If they find out, sure, they can help. Okay? But technically, on a general basis, if it's a court guardianship, there's no court guardianship until you are not able. Now let's say the situation. You had a stroke, you were not able for 3 years, and then you recover, the guardianship will terminate. You don't need it. If you get better. And then, you can fire them if you get better.
How about if you don't have children?
You can appoint a professional. There are professional trustees and fiduciaries, or even your relatives and friends, so long as you decide they will act in your best interest. Now, usually when that happens, I tell my clients, make sure that person have plenty of assets themselves. They don't have a reason to take your money. I usually tell them to pick the people that are richer than them.
就是钱在做坏。
当我们面对要决定治疗不治疗、治疗什么、要不要的时候，常常我们认为我都清楚。当医师跟我讲，我就是要这样治疗。但是 incapacity 一个点是，当医师跟你说你可以做这些治疗的时候，你傻傻的站在那边，那很明显是you are incapacity，对不对？你不晓得要怎么决定，那时候就有问题了，绝对是有问题。你可以讲的天翻地覆，什么政治什么讲得很好，但是叫你 pick up one thing， 你可以决定的时候，你傻住了。所以我们常常讲，痴呆的病人。很简单，问一下，你今天早上吃什么？他马上转头看他太太，那一定是有问题。早上吃什么你都忘记了，你不晓得了，那一定是有问题。这是简单的 test， 是这样。所以呢，就是说，当这个 decision making 在一个 point 说你要决定要不要治疗，要不要做什么治疗的时候，你一直彷徨，不晓得要怎么办，那些问题一定要想。所以呢，这个情形下，你如果发现自己没办法决策，一定要指定人帮你做决策，不然的话，你说在那个情形下，你不要治疗，结果全部一大堆治疗。大概11月份有一篇写要看一个 cardiac surgeon 呢，他在 emergency room 要为一个病人插那个一个管件的心脏他在插的时候看着这个病人眼睛很生气在看着他，因为很痛苦。但是呢，因为他没办法决定，所以他儿女说全套抢救， 所以他心里非常难过，说这个人不应该再救，应该让他走，他很痛苦，但是他没办法讲话，没办法，他只是很生气的看着这个医生，他给他查这个问题，所以我们一定要提早决定，趁你现在还清楚的时候，决定你要怎么治疗，你要指定谁帮你忙，这个要想好、定好，因为什么事情都可能发生，任何时候，是这样。那你像 Guardian 这个东西，一拖就几年，花很多钱，你为什么不花时间自己想一下，现在就决定？那么这样的话不用花什么钱，而且你找的 Guardian 根本不了解你。有时候Guardian他很忙，他只知道我代表谁，但是真的是这样吗？他了解他的情形吗？也不一定。他们只是照公式这样决定的。
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier that the best situation is that you prepare the proper document earlier, right?
When there is no stress.
Right, but many of us face the situation when you discover the situation, it's already too late. So now you face the situation where you need to deal with the person who is already partially
Yes, we do that too. Yeah.
So I want to explore that area a little bit. So let's say my father is already like in the early stage of the disease, and the children detected that, and we want to do something about it. So at times we can talk him into doing the document.
As you can, yeah.
And he would say, oh, okay, I'll sign this. But a week later, he would deny he signed anything. So how do we, resolve that issue?
That's a good question. First of all, when we deal with a situation that's an onset, you have to hit it as early as possible. But it's going to be a process. Now, the way we do it, we don't just talk to the son and prepare the documents and sign it. Now, when they already have some issues, but they're not all the way gone, okay? Because incapacity is not just some memory loss. It's really, there are two court tests, okay, as to what case law, what that means, okay? And I always find out from the family, do they know the family members? Do they know their assets well? And what are the issues? And then we talk to, I actually talk to the doctor sometimes. If they're already, let's say halfway, we have to have the doctors involved. I have to have the letters before I can have this person sign. Okay. So if something is already started, it is probably a 2 to 6 month process to do it right. Okay, we interview. And I've done this actually at least a couple of times where we actually got the intent from this man, and he came to sign, he could not sign that day. He couldn't track with me the day of signing. We tracked over a couple of different meetings as to what he wants to do. And I sent him home. That day, like I said, he wasn't ready. So we sent him home, think about it, he has to be calm, and they came back a month later. And we talked some more, and he was okay, we signed up. It is possible the next month this man will come back and change again. It happens. But when he change again, I will talk to him again and see. But that's why if you have a relationship that starts this process, it's better. Because if let's say he disintegrated more, a lot more, it's possible the new changes are not effective. But we have the old document. If he truly wants to change, we do change again. It is not uncommon that during this period, however long, if that person is actually able to make the decision because he's just insecure or she's insecure, right? My own grandmother did this years ago when she was still alive. Sometimes she wanted to live with my uncle and sometimes she wanted to live with my uncle. And so she keeps changing. Even the distribution, because she wants to give them encouragement. This is before I was a lawyer. She sometimes said, I give you 50% and just give a little bit to them if you take care of me. I'm sure you've heard that. That happens. They write down. Then she doesn't like how they take care of her. Then she go change it again. That's actually legal, and it's part of the process. But that's why when everything is planned out ahead of time, like Dr. Chen said, when it's calm, when it's collected, you have a better chance of having a structure there, ready to go, instead of making nervous decisions. But if the person is still able and just insecure and really now I have to think about it, because I thought about it 20 years ago, then it is a possibility they will change.
Well, it is possible then, when the person signed a document, prepared a document, let's say 3 years later, he denied again, 3 years ago, no, I didn't sign anything.
It depends on his state at that point. Is he truly incompetent 3 years later? Then it doesn't matter what he says, that document is still valid. Okay? But if he is still somewhat there, not all the way gone, he can change and he can revoke it. Now, that's the power of attorneys. Trust, we have a way to minimize those issues. Okay, but of course I have to be comfortable with the clients and the children. So sometimes we do, if we already know this person says that a lot, if we put it in trust, the trust might say, with the consent of 3 people, then the changes are effective. But of course now you're taking rights from this person. But if he does this every day, or he can't remember he signed a document most of the time, then we might escalate to doing that. But now you're taking away rights from that person. And you have to assess the situation, whether that's actually a good thing or not. But having somewhat questionable changes are not good, because what if the same thing is, oh, I give this to my next door neighbor to change because all my kids are bad. My mom says it sometimes too, so. But if she really thinks that, right? I'm sure they say that, sometimes they say that to you.
So you sounded like the best process at that point is to involve an attorney, consulting with the doctor, put the proper documents, do it in the right process.
Correct.
So all the documentation at that point is sort of like proper.
Right.
And
right.
then if some dispute happens later, your first contact will still be your attorney to get everybody together
Right.
to evaluate the situation.
Right, and we're that much ahead, right? Because if I have an existing client, like, the Jewish family I said, known them for a long time, I know exactly what kind of assets we are dealing with. And certain assets, maybe it's very personal to a client, and every time he sees it, he worries. Well, if we already know that, those assets may be better off totally managed by the children already, where the father don't even have to look at the problems, right? Then he won't say, I forget, or I change my mind. So the one I told you about, the Bainbridge Island, when he first started and he progressed, we actually gave, his main asset, okay, we put $5 million at US Bank to manage the proper way. But he still had his own accounts. He still had his own checking and savings, because he was still fine for most of the time. He wants to control, right? But he was writing his own checks. There will be a point when he's not, but if he's looking at what stock to invest, what's long-term, that was too much for him. And so that went to the professionals. And he managed his small accounts. But of course, the risk is if you have a bad caregiver, that's why they added themselves. But we protected his main accounts. And the bank would put the income, right, the interest or the earnings into those accounts. They did take some, but just the income. But that way, we have to structure some kind of between, and it's a real process. I try to explain this kind of what we do, and other attorneys, not just me. We are not typists. Our job actually, I have typists that work for me, but our job is to figure out what's the family situation, what's the asset situation, and actually plan. Estate planning is the planning. That's what I like about my job, is to figure out what is the best division. Do we need 1 trust in this family, 2 trusts, 3 trusts? Some families that I have, they have more than multiple trusts because it works that way. One apartment is for this family, the other apartment is for the daughter's family, and they can't get along, but my client, the mom, loves them both. How do you deal with that? We structure it so that the mom's protected, and there's some accountability, and now there's what if this daughter gets divorced? Then I only have to mess with this pie, not the other pie. So it is planning, pre-planning, and if something happens, we will talk again. I'm not going to tell you what, if you've gone to some of these, what they call living trust seminars, they'll say, you get your trust done, no problem. I'm not going to say that because it's not true. Our lives change, but if you have a structure in place, then we will tweak and change the structure for a particular issue at that point. So it gets you way ahead of the game.
Thank you.
Yes.
I got a case, maybe, I don't know whether you can answer.
Okay.
I had a gentleman, he was talking very well, very smart, and he's Filipino. And one day he came to me and said, I heard all the new shoes. I think my wife is poisoned. Then next thing I heard is her daughter calling me from the East Coast saying, my father putting his poo-poo on my father's bed and do this. But when he came to me, it's fine.
Okay.
Very well.
Okay.
Then my question is, I think he's paranoid, but is he incapacitated or not?
Okay. We actually had a slide. If you look at your materials, and if those are the only things, paranoia by itself is not incapacity. Okay, by itself, it could be a sign of it. So I've dealt with that too, and there are people who are abusive with alcohol when they start to get sick. If they're drunk a lot, that itself is not incapacity. Okay, so but there is a point that they are, even if that happens, like that wife example I told you about. That man was truly incapacitated, but he was right at the edge, and he was smart enough to recover. And we had to deal with this, but he was harming her. So this was a second marriage. She is a very nice woman, but it was her third husband, and every other husband had died on her. And she said, I said, if he is harming you at night, he actually punched her one time. Just woke up, thought of a paranoia issue, and he punched her. And he was ready to go, and I said, you now have to think about yourself. Even his best friend says she should consider some other options for her. I said, well, you need to protect yourself first, and then you will have to assess how to deal with the situation. But just that by itself, it's not. If that happens, that's the trigger point where a lawyer and the family will have to call the doctors, get the appropriate test going. Usually, if I meet with a client like that, I can figure out at least by the second meeting whether this person has capacity or not. 90% of the time, I can figure out within the first meeting whether he truly has capacity. Because if you ask him decision-making or how the consequences of these paranoia issues, they know how to report. But if you say, how did it get there? What did you do afterwards? Why do you think your wife did that? That tells you a lot of the answers. Whether it's leading to incapacity or he's just having some paranoia, which happens at the onset. And if it's just the onset, then we really have to get ready, because you have to do something anyways. But if the man truly is incapacitated, we would then have to file guardianship. Because if this man is incapacitated, I can't have him sign documents. They cannot sign. So I've had this situation, people call me from the hospital, and they say, the nurse said, we have to get a power of attorney. My father doesn't have one. Can you draft one now and bring it to the hospital? I said, okay, I can't bring it now because I have to talk to your father first. Well, he's not awake. I can't draft one. That's too late. I have to go get a guardianship. So, but outside people, they don't know, right? So if that person did not call me and they said, oh, power of attorney, just go to Costco and get one. That's invalid. You cannot sign something when you are incapacitated. So But people that are at the hospital, they say, do you have power of attorney? And I said, oh no, but I'm gonna go get one. So if you talk to non-legal people, then everything that's done, all of the authority may be invalid. Now sometimes people do get by. They say, oh, but my neighbor did that. That was okay when needed. Maybe the hospital didn't catch it, or maybe it was fine because that person only has one child and he trusts his child 100%. When you're in a different situation, you've got two kids, they hate each other, then now the brother finds out, brother says, that's invalid, you're in court the next day. And unwinding everything costs 10 times, not just money, heartaches for you. Because now somebody has to interview and they have to do depositions. The stress is actually worse than the money you have to spend. So, and the more complicated your assets are and your family situation, you know, and life changes. We all want simple. You don't know how many times in my first conversation with a potential client, they always say, I'm very simple. And it's true, they're not lying to me. But are your children simple? Are your spouses, ex-spouses simple? Are your creditors simple? Are your business partners simple? Right? Because if I represent a doctor that has 2 other doctor partners in the clinic, or architects, or they co-own apartments. Well, here's another case. I have represented we talked to her, but she couldn't do anything. Her husband died. All the assets were co-owned with the siblings who didn't like her. They held everything together and didn't give her a dime after he died, even though he had ownership. So we would have to unwrestle everything from them. And for months, while we were fighting in court, she had to borrow money because the extended family members never ever liked her. So, you know, that person who died might be simple, but are your family members simple?
I have seen a case in ICU. I heard that one of his daughter took away $400,000. Then the other son came in the ICU. Forced him to sign something. I don't know. I cannot read. And he was in tears. And he was so sick and barely
He
his
still
son.
made him sign.
Yeah, his son told his hand to sign. Then I heard $200 coming. So I don't know what is that, but I just it's terrible.
Yeah, that's the lack of planning. That's when it happens. Even tangibles, not just money. This couple I represented in California, their estate plan is supposed to go to the charities, but when the one person was sick, one person had died, he was so depressed he couldn't do anything. The family that was coming over could even take things from his house because they were worried about the other family.
You mentioned about durable power of attorney and also the living trust. How does the will come into the picture?
Good question. So the will, if you decide not to have a revocable living trust, the will is what applies at death. Revocable trusts apply when you're incapacitated and deaf. And if you have a revocable trust, we usually do what we call a parole will, a mini will, that says if I happen to have anything in my name, put it in trust. Because a trust has to be funded during your life. We actually have a full session on those topics on its own. But it's a good question. A will is still essential, okay, even if you have a trust. But if you don't have a trust, then you gotta have a will.
So sounding like the best way to prepare all things.
Yeah, will does not apply until death. Okay? Like I said, when people call me and their father's in the hospital after a stroke, they said the will says I'm the next. And they take it to the bank doesn't take it, because that will is not valid until after death. You cannot use a will until that person is gone and the will has been submitted to court. I have to probate a will. The banks do not accept wills, even at death. They won't accept for sure if the person's not dead, but even if the person is dead, we take the will to court, tell the judge, show them the death certificate, and they give my client the powers. Then you go back to the bank with the court order for probate. So, but if you have it in trust, there's no guardianship and there's no probate. for those assets that are in trust. Yeah, we can do another event on these topics, but that's.
There are many people who own a trust, living trust. Like
I'm sorry?
Many people have a living trust in place, but they didn't put their assets in the trust.
Yes.
So all assets has to be in the trust.
Correct.
To make it legal.
For you to, well, it's not to make it legal. It's to make it outside probate. Okay, if you just have it in your drawer and you didn't transfer title, then I have to go to court when that person died and transfer it back into the trust.
Oh.
So you waste some efforts. Yeah. Yes.
You said the guardian needs to be a citizen of the United States,
Resident.
a resident.
Yes.
But what happened to the power of attorney and the trustee?
So trustee, trustee actually we prefer citizenship. You could name green card people, but if it's a non-US citizen, IRS requires additional filing and potentially a foreign trust treatment that requires a higher tax. So it's legal, but it's not preferred from an administrative standpoint for a trustee. We usually actually ask for citizenship for a trustee. So it's a good question.
So how about the power of attorney?
You can name people outside. There's no requirement that they are actually green card or citizen for power of attorney.
So anybody can
Right, if they don't mind flying here.
If you have a trustee, and you have a trust, and you have a trustee, it's a power of attorney. And then you also have a guardian, a different type, as you said. You have a trust, now you have to have another guardian. Then, in what situation, if the trustee or power of attorney is different from the guardian, and in what situation they are, which situation use guardian, which case use
Good question.
trust.
Good question. If you have a well-prepared trust and a well-prepared power of attorney, most likely you will not need the guardian. A guardian is appointed by the court. So if you do it right, now if you did the trust part way, you fund it halfway, and you have some assets outside and you become incapacitated and your power of attorney is not effective, then we have to do guardianship for everything that's not in trust. Okay, but if you did it right, you should not have to do a guardianship for 99% of what you have to deal with. There are still some instances. So you have an IRS lawsuit going, the IRS is chasing you for taxes in a court, not even just collecting. In general, we'll need a guardianship. But it's a very rare instance if you've got a good trust and a good company.
Do you deal with like multinational kind of situation where like the children or the guardians or the people involved like people in Taiwan and the U.S. and of course the court system there are different?
Yes, it is different. Yeah. So for example, in Taiwan, they have forced airship. Certain beneficiaries get certain things that I wouldn't say, but that's only for Taiwan real estate property that belongs to Taiwan. So there are different situations when there are assets in their members.
那还有没有问题？
How do you get a good power attorney?
It's a process. That's a great question. If you don't think about it and don't plan, even with a lawyer, I have clients who come to me after there's an illness and they say, I said, can I see the power of attorney? I said, you have a problem. Schwab won't accept it. Schwab's actually one of the very strict banks. They're good, but they're very strict. And he said, why is Schwab not accept my power of attorney? I went to, my best friend who's a lawyer. He did it. But let's say he's a corporate lawyer, he's not an estate planning attorney, and it wasn't done from a conversation that actually processed what's going on, that's not gonna be good. So I can't even tell you that it has to be lawyer done. Lawyer done does not necessarily mean it's well done. A good power attorney is one that addresses all your issues. It actually plans around your life. So.
还有一个要I'm talking about medicine 要决定治疗只要你能够决定 yes and no， 你要做治疗都是 right 不 wrong。Even you change， 你现在改这个，说我要急救，等一下1天以后说我不要急救，什么都对只要你能够决定，那就是对，因为我们不能说等 power attorney 等谁来，你当场要决定怎么治疗，你能够 decide 就照那个治疗所以我有病人痛得要死，说不要救了。结果医好了以后说，我还要再救，可以一直改反正就是说最 update 的那一件，那个时候就是 most important 我们就是高的那一个所以不要害怕。现在就是说要请大家写好了，像 POAST 啦、Living Will 这些呢写好，就是 just in case 你没办法决定的时候就 follow 那一个。但是当你醒来了，你可以决定了，全部可以照你最新的决定现在重点在于说你。到时候说连讲都讲不出来，不敢讲，或没办法决定，那就头痛了。所以一定要那个这些来做。
Yeah, let me add one more thing. Consistent. I have a lot of clients. They hold off because they have one apartment they don't know what to do, or they have some issues, and they say, "But I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready." The problem is if you have nothing, the court decides. The default law applies. You at least, if you put something together, like Dr. Chen said, you can change, later. So you should see your estate planning attorney or whoever it is to put something down, right? Because it's better than nothing. So, yes.
This is a hypothetical question. Suppose we have a trust and we have an alternative. Just in case, we will prepare, but just in case if this is going to use, this alternative disappear, or this organization disappear, is this a trust still valid or not?
Absolutely. Yes. Your documents are valid without the people involved.
So it doesn't matter.
You mentioned about someone has a karma and don't know what to do with it. For example, if they have a pretty well-written trust, they got most of their assets into that trust already, except that apartment, they don't know what to do with it. So they've been deciding, then something happens. Isn't there something called pour over a will or something that something is not in there?
Yeah.
It will be put in there.
Exactly. Yes. So we have to prepare the parole will. Okay? So when that happens, anything left outside trust will be put in. But what's in the parole will, we have to go through court just for the apartment.
Oh, still.
Yes.
Even you have this pour over will, you still
Yeah.
have
The
to.
parole will just says take what I have outside and put it together, please.
But then
Put together
you still
is
have to
through the court, right?
Oh, you have
So
to
you
go
should
through-
remember to put everything, right? Because otherwise, why would you need to?
I see, okay, all right. So are you going to have more seminars like this, or do you have seminars, outside,
your
yes,
time.
yeah, somewhere else?
Yeah, if you look at our, let's see, I think we put the website information, our website. Okay, so you look at the last page. Our website address is actually the first page. ChangLawGroup.com. We have our PowerPoint presentations. If you want some more information, you could go there. But I'm happy to come back and do some of the other ones. I did a series a few years ago that's called Intermediate. This falls under Intermediate Estate Planning. And we have 4 different seminars. I think we did all 4 here too. Yeah. So we can, do something like that again. But we have a tax topic, we have a trust topic, that includes the wills we come over.
Can you give us a little bit tell us a little bit about the community property in Washington State?
that itself is a whole topic, but we could probably do that. Yes. Yeah, that's a very good question. Because I'll just answer a little bit about that. A lot of clients, and unfortunately especially Asian clients, in our Chinese community, they're very focused on whose name is on title. Community property trumps that. They change that without you knowing. So just because you give a house to your daughter in her name during marriage, it doesn't necessarily mean it's hers. It could be with the spouse. So that's a very good question. We could do a community property. Yeah, community property actually affects distribution and it affects if there's a divorce. Most people don't know that. Yeah, just focusing you have name on something, it does not mean that it's not subject to community property. Yeah, we can work out a few dates on that.
好，那没有问题吗？没有，要再谢谢啊，谢谢薇薇。大家来拿哦。那再讲一次，下个礼拜六是比较 tricky 的问题 ，how to communicate with husband, children, your parents, helpers 哦。因为他现在是用的是 I message to replace you message 这个方法，不太容易哦。因为我刚提了，我们都是6、7岁，有习惯固定的那个个性。你现在是要拜托别人，用比较平静的口头吧哦，比较客气一点的说，拜托哦。别人就说你小孩子没有来帮什么忙，你为什么不这样呢？还是说我有什么事想要帮你？怎么说？这个 I message 跟 you message 的 communication 哦是不太容易，所以我准备那下个礼拜看看大家来练习。那你有什么困难？你说跟你的小孩子沟通困难，怎么来大家来练习来想什么比较好？现在因为我们越来越老了，你需要别人帮你照顾或 take care of many things 的人越来越多，你不能老是用你的个性叫你的太太或先生，叫你的小孩子做什么，不可能哦，他们有他们的agenda，所以你要什么方法能够达到你要求的，然后他能够愿意来帮你，这是沟通的问题哦 ，communication。那这个是用现在美国建议大家用的方式哦。那我准备，我越准备越觉得不容易，因为我们都有个性。你叫我说脸放下来说，拜托你来帮我做个，非常难哦。但是这个要练习，那是不得不做，因为当你倒下去的时候，你需要别人来给你擦屁股的时候，怎么办？哦，你只能够拜托他帮忙。哦，不管你是被送到疗养院去上哪里，都是要这样哦。所以我们要改变我们的思考方式了哦。这是下个礼拜要提的。好，好，那谢谢 Vivian 好。
Family communication.